Thanks to everybody for joining us today. We have some nice materials to share with you about the updates to the model content frameworks that were released last Monday on the 20th, and also to share with you some additional item and task prototypes from mathematics and talk a little bit about how those items and tasks are linked to the content frameworks. We're also going to save some time at the very end to get some feedback from you all and draw on your good ideas for additional work ahead in PARCC. And with that, I'd like to introduce both Allison Barr and Carrie Piper, both of whom work on behalf of PARCC at Achieve, who will be assisting on the call today. And Carrie Piper, in particular, will be walking through the item and task prototypes in mathematics for you. So as you can see on your screen, the objectives for today include obviously getting a better understanding of the revisions to the frameworks, also getting into how the frameworks and the tasks are aligned with each other, looking for your suggestions for communications and supporting materials, and then also thinking about how to learn from each other about how you're planning to use the content frameworks. So again, we can, as is the spirit of educator leader cadres, build some shared knowledge together. So next slide, please. We'll begin with the model content frameworks, and I'm going to do just a quick review for everybody since we've done these next couple slides a few times, but always want to make sure that if new folks are listening to it, we're able to ground them in the background. The original purpose of the content frameworks, I should say dual purposes of the content frameworks, were both to inform the development of the assessment system, right, including the blueprints that will be used to drive item development, and also to support implementation of the standards at the state and local levels. And because of that, the document was written to be tuned to both state and local curriculum directors who are doing much of the work around implementation on that side of the house of the Common Core State Standards, as well as building administrators and teachers, right, who are doing the day-to-day work of getting the standards into the hands of the kids. An audience that's not listed up there, but probably should be, is actually, state assessment directors, as well as the item developers themselves. As I've said a few times, the model content frameworks are essentially the Rosetta Stone for the PARCC assessment system, and they're being used in very, very tight connection with the item development process and the blueprint development process. So both of those purposes are embedded and built into the content frameworks, and we'll show in particular today how the work around item development and the prototypes themselves are connected to the content framework. So next slide, please. You'll recall that the content frameworks were created through a state-led process, right, that included lots of different folks, right? It included content experts from PARCC states, it included Common Core State Standards writers, and it also included a number of other experts across the U.S., many of whom are on the PARCC Content Technical Working Group. You'll also recall that in November of last year, PARCC released the content frameworks after 3 rounds of feedback, including a public comment period that included K-12 educators, all the way down to students. We had a couple students provide some feedback as well, which was quite helpful, actually. And then just in the last 10 days, PARCC re-released the updated version of the content frameworks based on these latest rounds of feedback that were built on people's ability to put the content frameworks into practice over the last year. So there were 2 rounds of feedback since the November 2011 review, including a public comment period in June, and should note that the majority of that feedback came from mathematics educators. The approach to the content frameworks were to illustrate, the major moves forward in the standards themselves. And I think this is a good opportunity to point out that the standards are one document, right? They are the driving document. And the content frameworks are an analysis of those standards. And we encourage anybody who is using the content frameworks to have your standards open side by side, so that you can always refer back to the standards that are described or used or alluded to in the content frameworks themselves. And those frameworks do, go back to those big advances in the standards, focus and coherence, right, connecting conceptual knowledge, conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, as well as applications and modeling. And then, of course, describes how the standards for mathematical practice can be connected directly to the content. There were two types of frameworks that were created, as you'll recall, one for grades 3 through 8, and then one for high school. However, the one for high school came in two parts, one for Algebra 1 Geometry and Algebra 2, and another for Mathematics 1, Mathematics 2, and Mathematics 3. And I'll note that the content frameworks, for those of you who are more inclined towards web-based browsing of materials, the content frameworks are also online in a live searchable site that you can access through parconline.org. Clicking on the In the Classroom tab, you'll be able to access the content frameworks that way. So why don't we move forward, Allison, and talk a little bit about how this idea of major, additional, and supporting clusters came to be. During the ELC convenings, we got this question a number of times, just where exactly do these pieces come from? And the most straightforward answer is that major, additional, and supporting actually came from the standards themselves. You'll recall that the standards are basically built on major clusters, right? Or excuse me, not major clusters, but major progressions of content over the years. And so for example, you will see in grade 6 that there is quite a bit of specificity to expressions and equations, which does signal their priority, in large part because this is a major moment in the progression of the algebra stream heading into high school. And so it should come as no surprise then that also in grade 6, the expressions and equations clusters are all major, right, because the standards themselves are indicating as much. In another example, you'll see that in grades K through 5, that 3 out of 5 of the domains in the Common Core State Standards are focused on various aspects of arithmetic or right, numeracy, so to speak. And so, again, it should not come as a surprise that 15 out of 20 of the clusters associated with arithmetic in general are major in the model content frameworks. And then, if you want to see some specific examples, we're providing it up there for you on the screen, that there are some standards that are directly related to a major strand and actually really help to inform it. And, we're showing here that measurement and data, standard 7 and standard 5 from 5th grade and from 3rd grade really help to supplement that understanding of the arithmetic through some geometric concepts and measurement concepts. So when you hear people ask or wonder about where did major, additional, and supporting come from, again, one of the most straightforward answers you can provide is actually they came from the standards themselves, that where the standards were specific and indicated importance and priority, the content frameworks followed suit with the major, additional, and supporting. So new with the August release, and actually as part of the releases, through the state feedback and then the public feedback over the last year, were the high school model content framework. So Allison, why don't we move forward to the next slide? And one of the questions that you may receive about the high school content frameworks is, in what ways are they different from or the same as Appendix A in the Common Core State Standards for Mathematics, right, what are referred to as the model course pathways. And I think what's important for those who are engaged in implementation of the standards and getting ready for the PARCC assessment system to understand is that Appendix A was a launching point for the model content frameworks. Which is to say that much of what folks will see in the Appendix A, the model course pathways, they'll also see reflected in the content frameworks. However, not everything is the same, and those areas that are different are the result of the benefit of almost 2 years' worth of feedback on that Appendix A and much more input into what those sequences can look like. And one of the most common examples that people will find and have already been asking questions about is in the Algebra 1 Geometry, Algebra 2 sequence that in Appendix A, folks will note that there are probability standards in the geometry course. But in the model content frameworks upon which the PARCC assessment system is being built, the probability standards are actually moved into Algebra 2. So there are some differences, and again, they're the result of the benefit of a lot more input and analysis and thought into the standards themselves, and so it'll be important for folks to recognize that the content frameworks are essentially an evolution of Appendix A. Also different with this release in August 20th that was also the beneficiary of the feedback over the last 6 to 9 months or so was the inclusion of cluster emphases or content emphasis by cluster and associated assessment limits for both Algebra 1 Geometry, Algebra 2 sequence and the Mathematics 1, 2, and 3 sequence. For those of you who recall, last November when the content frameworks for high school were released, there were not cluster emphases by course. And their inclusion now into the content frameworks is a direct outgrowth of the fact that the PARCC assessment system does include end-of-course exams for all 6 of those courses, and so getting those cluster emphases sorted out and then noting where certain standards might be cross-cutting or certain clusters might be cross-cutting from one course to the next was important for blueprint development as well as for implementation purposes. In determining what would be major, additional, and supporting, there were 2 primary decision rules that were relied upon. One was that any cluster that appears as major in one sequence also appears as major in the other sequence, and that is to ensure that there are comparable levels of rigor, regardless of which sequence states or districts or schools wind up using. And the other major decision rule is actually around the idea of focus. You'll all recall that the standards themselves in high school, they don't really, scream out focus. I think they do a very nice job of indicating coherence, but, some additional work was necessary for implementation purposes and for assessment purposes to, add a little bit more, or not necessarily add, but at least provide some additional focus to those high school standards. And so the second major decision rule was actually to try to keep right around the number 10 of the major clusters that are in each sequence. So you'll see that in the traditional courses there are about 7 to 9 major clusters in each course, and in the integrated sequence there are about 10 to 11 major clusters, and the difference there between the traditional sequence and the integrated sequence is actually in the result of some clusters being cross-cutting in more cases in the Mathematics 1, 2, and 3 sequence than in the other, which benefits coherence in a number of ways, I think, without losing too much focus. I think even having about 10 to 11 major clusters in any particular course does still provide the needed focus for the assessment development and implementation. So why don't we go ahead and move on then to the next slide. And I do see some questions coming in on the chat feature, and just want to let folks know that we'll be responding to those questions at the end of the presentation. So if you can hold tight on that, we'll go ahead and get to those questions in a little bit. And for those of you who have questions but haven't asked them yet, please do feel free to use that chat window so that we can attend to those at the end of the presentation. At this point, what I'd like to do, now that we have a background on the model content frameworks and what's different between the version that was released on August 20th and the version that was released last fall, is to turn now to the item prototypes and have a discussion about how the item prototypes both function to serve a variety of different needs, but are also connected to the model content frameworks themselves. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Piper, the Senior Advisor for Mathematics at Achieve on behalf of PARCC. So, Carrie?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Doug. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thanks. Before I get started about talking about the item prototypes, I just wanted to touch on what's different about PARCC's development process. And, you know, as Doug spoke about, the model content frameworks really provide a guidance for excellent instruction aligned to the standards. But they also provided guidance to the assessment blueprint design. So the frameworks are really a bridge between the Common Core State Standards in Mathematics and the assessment design. So for the first time, PARCC is really communicating the same voice to teachers as it is to the assessment developers. So with that in mind, I want to go in and show you some actual item prototypes. So the way these prototypes have been developed, and I know Doug touched on this at your last ELC meeting, but we did have some teams of classroom teachers and higher education faculty from the Charles A. Dana Center, the University of Texas, and they developed some prototype items for PARCC, and we have 5 tasks from them, and then we also have some tasks that came from our contractors, ETS and Pearson, and members of the Common Core writing team. And the way that these items were reviewed, there were members of the Common Core writing team, members of the PARCC Content Technical Working Group, which include mathematicians and higher ed math educators across the country, as well as PARCC state leaders and content experts. So let me go ahead, and Allison, if you could go into the PARCC website. I'm just going to show everyone where you can find that. Allison, I think we lost your screen. There you are. So here you see the opening page of the PARCC website. And if you go into the PARCC Assessment tab, you'll see that there is a link to item and task prototypes on the left side. Here's the landing page for the item and task prototypes, and there is a lot of information right here on this main page. And I do want to point out, towards the bottom of your screen, there's a PowerPoint presentation for mathematics and for ELA, but ELA will be talked about next week. And you can use those PowerPoints in your districts, in your states, to talk more about the assessment development and item and task prototypes. So I encourage you to take a look at that. We're not going to go through that for timing. I really want to get into some of the prototypes. So Allison, if you can click on Grade 3 Mathematics. Here is a grid that you'll see for each grade level for mathematics. And this grid talks about the 3 different task types. And in our PowerPoint that we're using also has the 3 different task types. So if you are in your district and you want to use the PowerPoint that we're showing you now, you can, and you don't have internet access, we have all the information in the PowerPoint. So just in case. So if you scroll down, you'll see we have the type 1 tasks, which are machine scorable tasks. Then you have your type 2 tasks, which assess mathematical reasoning, which could be partial machine scorable and partial hand scored. And then you have your type 3 tasks, which assess mathematical modeling, again, which could be partial machine score and partial hand scored. So we are going to go into, if you can click on the field under the type 2. And here is a sample item for grade 3 mathematics. It is a type 1 task. It's actually multi-part, so it has a part A and a part B. It's machine scored, and it assesses the standard 3NF1, which is on fractions. And it's a major focus in grade 3. So it's major content. So when you go back to your model content frameworks, you would see the green mark next to the standard, or next to this cluster. It also assesses the mathematical practice 7, which is looking for and making sure of structure. And it's technology enhanced. So we can demonstrate what you would do is you would just pull the soybean up, and you would create the field with soybeans. And if the student messes up, they could hit reset and reset everything. And Allison, if you can click on the PDF at the bottom. Along with each item, you'll see a PDF at the bottom, and it includes all the information you need. If you scroll down, you'll see that it includes, that's part 2, we'll get to that in a little bit. All the information about the standards, about the item description and assessment qualities, what shift in the standard this particular item is talking about. And if you scroll down a little more, it goes into scoring. So you have these PDFs for every single item. Okay, you can go back. So if you click on the right arrow, we'll go over to Part B. Now this portion of the task is a Type 2 item. This is where it's partially hand-scored, but it's also partially machine-scored. It's assessing a different part of the standard, which is also a major focus, and it assesses reasoning. So unlike traditional multiple choice, there's more than one correct solution on the machine scorable portion. And when you actually go through this, the soybeans would still be in the field. And because we reset at the first section, they're not there right now. And then the student could just type in their answer, and that part would be actually hand-scored. Okay. And then real quick, if you want to go back to the PowerPoint so everyone can see on the PowerPoint these 2 items. Okay, so here, if you're using the PowerPoint for a presentation, you can see that all the information is there next to this particular part of the item. And then you can go to the next one. And again, here as well. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few more math items. We can go back to the website. We're going to look at a grade 6 sample item. You can go to grade 6 math. There we go. Oh, there we go. And it's a grade 6 slider ruler. Now here's a nice task. It's a type 1 task. It's also machine scorable. And it's talking about ratios and proportions, and which is a major focus in middle school and in grade 6. And you can see that the slider can actually move. If you move it over to the 1, you can see the relationship between inches and centimeters. Now this particular item shows a key advance between grade 6. It talks about the major focus in grade 6. And it also is unlike a traditional multiple choice. It's a multiple select, and there's more than one solution, so it's really difficult to guess on this type of item. Okay, let's go to grade 7. And this one, actually, if you scroll down, you'll see prototype items. This is where the website is going to link you to the Dana Center website to see some of their items. So we're going to go there and take a look at one. So if you go to middle school, and then let's go to the spicy veggies. And if you have not had a chance to go through this website, I highly recommend going through and reading about the relationship between PARCC and the Dana Center and the partnership in developing these prototype items. And the first page here talks about the task itself. And then if you click on the Common Core alignment, you can see which standards this aligns to. So this one happens to be ratio and proportions for Part A. So let's go ahead and click on Part A. So here is a sample of, this is actually a multi-prompt task, and it is integrated. So integrated means it can include more than one standard across clusters, across domains. And that is something that will be on the assessment, and that is being built into the blueprints. And you can see that this is a major focus in grade 7, and a key advance from grade 6 to grade 7 is the student's ability to solve real-world problems and mathematical problems by reasoning proportionally with ratios of fractions. So this is, unlike a traditional multiple choice, it's a technology-enhanced fill-in-the-blank format. And what's innovative about this is it accommodates partial credit in a machine-scored format. And that has not been the case in the past with most state assessments. You can go on to Part B. So here's Part B of the item. And again, you have the fill-in-the-blank technology. And if you look at the scoring section, you can see how this particular task is scored. You can click on scoring. And if you scroll down, you can see this particular task was a total of 3 points. And you can see how partial credit could be given. Okay, if we can go back to the PARCC website. Now let's take a look at a high school item. And let's go to the high school functions item, which is the first item under Type 1. There you go. Now this is a really nice Type 1 machine-scored item. It has a drop-down technology-enhanced capability. This is a function standard, and it is supporting work back in the model content frameworks in the both integrated and traditional series, and relies on the knowledge of FIF, cluster, on function notation, which is actually major work in both series. So it's an item that focuses around supporting work, but it does draw upon major work in this cluster. And you can see, unlike the traditional multiple choice, you have the drop-down format, and you can demonstrate that for us. So this also accommodates for partial credit in a machine scorable format. And there are some other tasks on the website. I encourage you to go to the website and play around with these items, learn about them, read all the documentation around them. There's a lot of information there. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I am going to hand this back over to Doug. I think we need to go back to the PowerPoint and go through a few slides, unless you can just skip.
Thanks, Carrie. And while we're navigating back to the PowerPoint, I did want to make a quick announcement to everybody about the model content frameworks. We have noticed in the last few days that there are actually some formatting errors to the math model content frameworks. They have been found, they have been dealt with, and PARCC is going to be re-releasing the model content frameworks within the next week or so. We'll be sure to get a notice out to everybody when that does happen. There aren't very many, it's just a handful really, but we want to make sure that you all know that so you can keep an eye out for the revised version. And it will say revised on it so that you'll know you have the most up-to-date version of the model content frameworks. So with that quick announcement, what we'd like to do with with the remainder of our time is both respond to questions as they've come up, but also give you all a chance to weigh in. So we're going to try a little interactive feature here associated with your work around implementation and in particular around improving teaching and learning. And this is what we're going to try, right? I'm going to put a question up on the screen for you, and then what I hope everyone will do is go ahead and respond to the question by sending a chat response to everyone. Participation here is optional. It's not required, but we do think that this would be a nice way to build, again, some collective knowledge and share some ideas. So you see the first question up there. I have used or will use the model content frameworks and the item prototypes to blank. And what we're hoping you'll do is go ahead and respond in that chat box to everyone with how you would fill in that blank. So I'm going to put myself on mute for a couple of minutes here and give you all a chance to write in. And just so you all know, we'll also be capturing this and sharing it out with folks, the rest of the ELCs who are not able to join today. So I already see some responses coming in. Thanks, folks. I'll read them off as they come up. Develop professional development for teachers on how to increase the rigor of items they typically give students. Build and refine our curriculum maps. Guide our scope and sequence documents in the district. Iron out the high school scope and sequence. Share information with my department. Frame various aspects of the work used to support teachers in seeing the relationship between the standards and the assessment system. Help instruct pre-service teachers. Make presentations to raise awareness and share resources. Refine the curriculum maps. I think Allison is reposting some of these to everyone. For the items we plan to share, a comparison of the old state assessment items with the new prototypes. Emphasize the interconnectedness of the grade level standards. Really wonderful. I'll just give another 30 seconds or so for anybody else to make some changes. Or not make some changes, but add some comments here. Help teachers understand the demands of the standards. Use the prototypes to plan assessment revisions. Change our culture of assessment, somebody wrote. Show the critical shifts. Help teachers understand that it's not just about what is being taught, but that they need to change the way that they teach. Showing the critical shifts. Well, thanks, everybody. Why don't we go to the next slide? I think you all actually came up with some nicer examples than we did, but here's some additional potential uses just to continue to seed the ground here. Evaluating instructional resources, right there. There's kind of a suite of tools. I mentioned this, I think, to cohort 2, but not necessarily to cohort 1. And among them is the model content frameworks for thinking about instructional resources. There are 2 others, including the Tri-State rubric, which is on the Achieve website, and the Math Publishers Criteria, which is on the Student Achievement Partners website. And each of them takes a look at the issues of instructional materials through slightly different but highly complementary lenses. So you really can't go wrong in using any one of them. And actually encourage folks to take a look at all three and see what makes the most sense for you. A few of you noted building model instructional unit plans, providing awareness around the balance of tasks, building an understanding between the connections between the content and the practices, which is something that the PARCC folks are often caught saying on a pretty regular basis, that it's not just about practices, and it's not just about content standards, it's about how the two work together. Supporting increased focus and coherence, and then also supporting vertical planning work, which we saw a few folks mention. So great. Why don't we move to the next question? And then I'm actually going to add a question that I'm going to read off of the chat feature in a little bit. But the next question here for our time is, how are the expectations for students changing? And what does that mean for how you will work with your students? And for those of you who don't work directly with students, the question could be refined to say, what does that mean for how you will work with your folks who are working with students, right, with your teachers who are working with students? And as you are adding your responses via the chat feature to this question, one person asked, how do I get this PowerPoint? And this PowerPoint will be posted to the ELC portal when we're done. So thanks to the first response, more emphasis on the habits of mind, less on the what, more on the how. Increased emphasis, nice, wow, going fast. Students need to develop conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and the ability to apply knowledge. It's not okay just to know the math, you have to be able to use it too. Yeah, students are no longer able to be passive. Teachers need to design experiences to support active and engaged learning. I was in a conversation with somebody earlier today, as you can read through additional responses coming up, that in many ways we're moving from a culture of choosing the best answer to creating the best answer, which is no small undertaking. And hopefully these documents will help folks in understanding that a little bit more deeply. Yeah, as far as how we work with students, less telling. Integrate more technology into instructions. Teachers will need to move into the facilitator role. I'm trying to read as many as I can as they come up for folks. More focus on deeper understanding. Nice. Just a few more seconds here. I work with adults, but building their understanding of this work will ultimately improve instruction and learning. Absolutely. Emphasis on transferable knowledge, increased emphasis on application. Allison's resending a few things. I like this one, Jara. Students will learn to earn credit for good thinking, not just correct answers. Conceptual understanding, Virginia, great. Perseverance is going to be key for students. That's right, Mari. Very nice. All right, I think we have one more question. Is that right, Allison? Maybe two more questions. Yeah, one more question, and then I'm going to add one ad hoc. When PARCC releases the next set of sample items, it will be helpful to have blank in order to more effectively understand and use the items. So let's take that one first, and then we'll move on to the second one. When PARCC releases the next set of sample items, it will be helpful to have blank in order to more effectively understand and use the items. I get to play Richard Dawson, I guess, survey said. Scoring rubrics, time limits, levels of rigor, evidence-based design, more specifically around reporting, student work, examples of student responses with scoring, calculator policies, more examples for more grade levels, which are planned to be released. Great. Yeah, so in addition to student work, what is exemplary work? Yeah. Anchor papers, right? The claims for evidence-centered design, universal design, or universal design descriptors, potential accommodations. Just a note on that, the accommodations guidelines manual is due to be released in the spring and in their final form. But prior to that, draft versions of it will be made available to states and then ultimately the public to weigh in on as well. So the plan is for folks to get more access to that information over the next 6 to 9 months or so.
And also, Doug, if I can just chime in, we do plan for PARCC plans for the second phase of the release to get some embedded supports in some of the sample items so people can start to see how those may look on the assessment. So just to put that in there.
Great, thanks. Reference materials that will be available to students. Nice. All right, let's move on to the second part of this question. What additional tools, resources do you need to support your work and to work with your colleagues? You know, I think it's very much the same question, but if it rings differently to you, please go ahead and add what additional tools, resources, et cetera, do you need to support your work and work with your colleagues? So we have prototypes. Folks have asked for, primarily to a large degree, samples of student work, scoring rubrics. Along with that, what are anchor papers or exemplar responses there? But beyond that, what else would be useful for you to have PARCC develop? Prototypes for K2. Keep providing PowerPoints that we can use, videos, webinars, etc. Great videos. Video vignettes. So for those of you who are writing video vignettes, it would be helpful to know video vignettes of what? Definitely prototypes for K2. Gotcha. Video vignettes of classroom applications, of instruction to standards. Great. Podcasts that teachers can watch on their own time. Content frameworks for K2 as well. Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, being able to see coherence more clearly. Models of teaching. Yeah, classroom use of technology. I heard a great example of how technology is being used in one school today as additional answers come in. The students have, it's just a bevy of technological supports for kids. And in this one case, every student had an iPad. The classroom was equipped with something along the lines of Apple TV, right? Of course, there was a smart board and a document reader and a few of those other pieces, but students were actually able to show their work and respond to questions and walk the rest of their classmates through their thinking using their iPad and streaming through the Apple TV onto the screen for the rest of the class to see. So you can imagine a kid actually teaching the rest of the class using their iPad going through the screen, which is pretty, it was described to me. I haven't actually seen it myself, but it sounds pretty amazing. Yeah, a message about growth measurement and how reliability and validity will be affirmed. A little history on how students respond to the tasks, and that's coming. Model videos of teachers teaching the standards for mathematical practice. Good. Text complexity versus reading level, levels of rigor, scoring, etc. Great, thanks, Jeff. Fantastic. Good, thanks. So, Allison, I'm going to put you on the spot here and actually ask you to type in the question as I read it. It actually came through the chat feature earlier on. And it was this. For those folks who are pretty focused still on ACT and SAT, right, are there talking points that PARCC has developed to help people also see the benefits of PARCC? And my response to that question was PARCC has not developed, talking points to that effect. But I suspect many of you have been in conversations with others about this very issue, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to share how you are responding to that question, right? So we have ACT or SAT, why should I do PARCC is essentially the question. I'm wondering if other folks have responses to that. One thing I can think of is ACT and SAT, are used mainly for admissions purposes, and one of the benefits of PARCC is it will be used to help waive remedial coursework, which at this point is not something that, as far as I understand it anyway, either ACT or SAT is positioned to do. Oh, great. So Carol has responded, working on a draft of talking points right now to this effect. ODE in Columbus. Similar question regarding AccuPlacer. So this is new ground. Yeah, they're aligned with standards in our curriculum, right, as opposed to being external to the curriculum. So this looks like it's relatively new ground for PARCC. And so sharing our resources and having PARCC develop some of these talking points looks like it's going to be pretty useful. And then Eugene just added a piece here. Everyone is moving to align their assessments to the standards. I respond by bringing them back to the dialogue about the work around common standards and how this work links to make better data that measures better standards. Thanks, Eugene. Great. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and conclude this part of the webinar, and really appreciate everybody willing to jump in and share some ideas around using the chat feature. What I'd like to do at this point is actually ask you to use the chat feature to raise any questions that we have not already answered. They're still burning for you. And one of those, I'm going to come back to one that was asked towards the beginning of our webinar today around, if a school is using the traditional approach, should they be thinking about putting the probability standards in geometry or Algebra 2? And my response would be that, if you're in a PARCC state and your kids are going to be taking PARCC assessments and you're using the traditional approach, you would be encouraged to take a close look at those content frameworks which do have the probability standards in Algebra 2 as opposed to geometry. So I'll go ahead and pause there and see if folks have other questions. Around when will the second round of prototypes be released? And I'm going to turn to Carrie and see if she has an answer to that one for us.
Well, I can tell you that the Dana Center is working on some additional prototype items, and those are going to be going through an intensive review over the next month. So hopefully later this fall we'll have some more to release. Great, thanks. Another question, what's up with science? Anything coming with that? Well, not on behalf of PARCC. PARCC is focused on the Common Core State Standards, mathematics, and ELA literacy. So I do know that the next generation science standards are under development, but it's not connected to the PARCC work. So I don't have any good information, I'm sorry, to share with you about the science standards at this point in time. Will there be model units developed for PARCC? If so, when? PARCC is actually not intending to build model instructional units. And the main reason for that is actually that a number of the race to the top states are already engaged in that work. And PARCC felt like it would be a better use of resources to build off of the good work that states are already doing around that, particularly associated with the tri-state rubric and aligning instructional materials. So what PARCC will do is be sure to shine a light on that work as it continues to move forward, so folks will be able to, build on that as they see fit. Let's see. Any more districts moving toward the mathematics 1, 2, and 3 approach for high school? My high school colleagues are really stuck thinking only with their current model of Algebra 1, geometry, and Algebra 2. And
I don't think PARCC at this point has a good answer, and by good, I mean a complete answer for that. We have a lot of anecdotal information, right, about different localities moving in that direction, but nothing real firm that we could share at this point in time. So I would encourage other ELC members to go ahead and respond to that particular question. Let's see, looks like Tim is responding to Carol. And thank you, Judy Jenkins, that the Next Generation Science Standards are due to come out in mid-January. And Carol responding to Tim, I don't think they are finalized yet around the talking points from ODE. So you'll meet again September 21st again. So let's see, Allison is sending me some additional questions that were sent directly to her. Is PARCC just for high school? I'm an elementary teacher. No, PARCC is for grades 3 through 11. So there will be assessments for grades 3, 4, 5, 6, as well as 7, 8, and into high school. Another question, will there be pilot assessments, and how will we choose the districts involved? There are going to be 3 rounds of field testing and pilot testing for the PARCC assessment system, and the solicitation document for field testing is actually under development right now. And once that document is completed, we'll have more specific information about how districts can be involved in that. And so I will ask you to just be patient on that until PARCC can get that document completed. Next question. Will the assessments focus on minimal standards for college and career ready, or will they help to infuse a work ethic into higher level high school students who struggle in some college courses from lack of work ethic? Well, PARCC is focused on the Common Core State Standards, which include the content standards in mathematics as well as the standards for mathematical practice. And so while it won't, PARCC is not going to address, like academic or non-academic skill, type issues, that I think are often referred to as executive functioning skills, right? Things like work ethic. It will be asking kids to take on some challenging tasks. One of the tasks that is on the prototype list, but was not something that we went through today because we'd gone through it earlier, is actually the golf ball problem. As you work through the golf ball problem, particularly as you get to Part C, it does get pretty complicated. And so for students to do well on that particular problem, they're going to need to persevere and stick with that problem a little bit. So to the extent that PARCC can create items that do ask students to, really dig in and stick with a problem, it will do so, because that's one of the standards for mathematical practice. Beyond that, though, thinking about things like, general work ethic, that's outside the scope of the assessment system itself, but certainly, I think inside the scope of the work that states and districts are doing in helping teachers understand what the standards, what the standards mean and what they intend to communicate around student work. So here's a question that was sent to Allison, and she re-chatted. Is there a need to poll the educator leader cadres on integrated versus traditional sequences? The fear is that there is a fear that the two will not align on the assessment, and states will force districts to choose. So I'm going to put that one in the parking lot because I think the first part of that question, is there a need to poll the educator leader cadres on integrated versus traditional? I think it's a wonderful idea, and I think we're going to look for a way to gather information from the ELCs on that. However, being able to, once we have that information, I think we'd better be able to respond to the second part of that question. Although I will say that by the end of either sequence, right, whether it's Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, or Mathematics 1, 2, or 1, 2, and 3, students will have seen and been expected to demonstrate proficiency with the same sets of standards, right? All of the non-plus standards are in both sequences. The performance level descriptors are going to be consistent, and comparable by the end of each sequence with each other. So PARCC takes the task of making sure that each sequence is comparably rigorous to the other very, very seriously, and is already beginning that work in the construction of the blueprints. I'm going to keep going. You're welcome, Tanisha. Would it be acceptable? What would be an acceptable third grade explanation for Part B of the soybean problem? Rather than trying to answer that now, I'm sure Carrie has some thoughts about what would make sense in terms of providing either sample student work or scoring rubrics. Or Carrie, I don't know if you want to add anything right now about that particular question.
Not right now. We can get back to you on that one.
Okay. Another question that Barbara has shared is, what about students who take Algebra 1 in 8th grade? What assessments will they take? Barbara, that question is tied up in a lot of state-specific decisions as well as work that's happening with, the ESEA authorization or reauthorization. So right now, PARCC does not have a policy about that. Mostly because there are a lot of moving parts to it that haven't stopped moving just yet. So as soon as that becomes clearer, I'm sure PARCC will be more than happy to share that information. So I'm going to take just a few more questions here. We've watched a number of English language learners try the prototypes, and the word reset has been tough for them. Is there any talk of choosing a word more common to students? Try again, erase, or undo? And Melissa, I think that is fantastic feedback, and I see no reason why that word could not be made easier for kids to understand. And Carrie, I don't know if you want to respond to that as well.
Yeah, I tried to and I accidentally sent it to Allison. I am going to be taking that back to the team as soon as possible. That is a great suggestion, and thank you so much for that.
Yeah, great. So question from Kathy, will the PARCC assessments be used as an end-of-course assessment for a high school? Yes, that is the intent of the assessments being developed for Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, Mathematics 1, 2, and 3. Will PARCC be used as a graduation requirement? How are those cut scores coming along? And Tanisha, that is a state-by-state issue. That is not something that the consortium writ large, has weighed in on yet. However, there is a lively conversation amongst the chiefs about best ways to handle that. I will tell you that the predominant direction that conversation has been going, though, is that states really need to make that's going to most likely wind up being a state-based decision. However, if additional information or when additional information comes along with respect to that, we'll be sure to share it. Yes, it is likely. I think that we have a lot to gain from meeting together, regardless of sequence. Both groups can learn from each other, and I think that must be in response to whether it's traditional or the Mathematics 1, 2, and 3. Let's see. Also, at the Chicago MSP conference, we were told that PARCC would allow above-level tests. Is that still true? And Melissa, I apologize. I don't know what you mean by above level. So if you wouldn't mind chatting back in with a little more specificity, I can try to respond to that. How do you work with the fourth-year course standards as it relates to PARCC? And how will these relate to dual enrollment remediation and developing electives? So one way that PARCC is thinking about this is actually through some work that's referred to as college-ready tools. Which is more around implementation of the standards and not about the assessment system itself. Per the agreement with the U.S. Department of Education, the PARCC assessment system is designed to measure the college and career ready standards in both mathematics and ELA literacy. And in mathematics, that means the non-plus standards. So while I know that a number of states have taken up the issue of what to do with the plus standards, beyond into additional courses. That's actually not something that PARCC is going to develop assessments for. That's going to be more of a state-based issue than PARCC writ large. Let's see, Jeff. If a state elects not to purchase the optional components of the PARCC assessments, are districts allowed? If so, will there be item banks or only assessments for the optional? And Jeff, I don't have an answer for that yet, and I apologize. We are in the process of writing the ITN, or the solicitation document, for the diagnostic assessment, and I think some of those questions will get answered as that solicitation document is being written. So I'm going to ask you to be patient on that one. Once we have more information, we'll go ahead and send that along. Will there ever be a drawing feature for the students to draw a visual model to show equivalence rather than to explain? And Carrie, that question seems to land most squarely in your lap, if you wouldn't mind responding as best you can, and then I'll answer the last question from Melissa.
Yeah, that's a great question, and technology is still up for grabs right now. We're waiting actually for the contractors to supply us with a list of all possible technologies they can embed in items. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question right now, but just to let you know, we are looking into all possible technologies.
Great, thanks. And Melissa, thanks for responding back in with some additional specificity. And I think that's similar to the question that Barbara asked, about an 8th grade student who might be in the Algebra 1 course. What assessment would they take? And again, I think some of this is wrapped up in state policy and ESEA reauthorization. And so I don't have a good answer for you right now. However, as I said a moment ago, that's definitely on the governing board's radar, and something that as soon as some definitive information becomes available will be passed along. Okay, I'll go ahead and see if there are any other burning questions at this time, and if not, then we'll go ahead and thank you for spending a little over an hour with us today. And we'll be sure to get this webinar posted up on the ELC portal. And we'll also remind you that on September 5th, we're holding the ELA literacy webinars similar to this. And let me just remind everybody of the specific time on the 5th. It is at 4:30 p.m. Eastern for the ELA literacy on September 5th. Okay, I don't see any other burning questions coming up, so I think we'll go ahead and close things out for the day, and look forward to talking to everybody again. And thanks very much for your time.